Well, hello and good evening, everybody. And thank you for joining us either live or a recording for our Let's End Gender-Based Violence webinar. I'm your host for the evening, and my name is Margaret DeCook. I would like to say that this webinar is made possible by the Truth and Reconciliation Conversations, as well as Citizens High School. This evening, I am joined by two wonderful speakers, Wes and Brianna. Brianna is a couple and family therapy PhD candidate at Adler University. She is currently licensed as a marriage and family therapy associate and has been practicing since 2018. Because of her systemic training, Brianna has an understanding of how social factors impact our day-to-day lives. She dedicates her work towards deconstructing harmful narratives around social constructs like race, gender, orientation, socioeconomic status, and ability. Our other guest this evening is Wes. Wes is currently a graduate student in clinical mental health counseling at Adler University in Chicago. In the past, he has worked as a personal trainer and nutrition coach and has worked in sales at Google in San Francisco, California. He loves learning and teaching others psychology and how to have a better impact on the world. In his spare time, he likes to ride his bike, lift weights, and travel. Brianna and Wes, thank you both so much for being here this evening.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. At this point, I know that both of you have prepared some presentations to share with our students. And so, Brianna, at this time, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, let me get my screen share ready really quick. Okay. You guys see this okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I know I don't have a lot of time, so I won't spend a lot of time introducing myself, especially since I got that nice introduction from Margot. So the perspective that I'm taking today, I feel like a lot of times when we're talking about gender-based violence, we spend a lot of time, rightfully so, talking about what the signs and symptoms are, and then maybe how to heal afterwards or how to get resources afterwards. But we don't spend a lot of time talking about what to look for in a healthy relationship to begin with. So today I'm going to be talking about boundaries and relationships expectations, but more so centered around like gender role expectations within relationships, and just give you guys some stuff to think about and to consider for your own relationships in your lives, whether it's platonic or romantic. Okay, so we're starting off with boundaries. So what are boundaries? Boundaries are a number of rules and limits that we set for ourselves and for others when we are in relationships. So boundaries are really important in our relationship maintenance and the foundation of our relationships. They should be something that we talk about pretty early on in the formulation stages of our relationships. When we don't have good boundaries, it can lead to things like anger, resentment, and burnout. When we don't have good boundaries, it can also lead us to find ourselves in relationships that might not be the healthiest for us for one reason or another. So making sure that we have healthy boundaries with ourselves and other people will be a good way to make sure that we are maintaining and creating healthy relationships down the line. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about 3 types of boundaries today, and I'm going to give some bullet point examples of what you might see in each category. So there's healthy boundaries, porous boundaries, and then rigid boundaries. Okay, so what does a healthy boundary look like? So someone who has healthy boundaries would value their own opinions and they don't compromise their values for others. So this can sound relatively rigid. However, it's not that they don't consider other people's feelings or other people's values, but when they are considered, they also consider theirs, and their values are important to them, and their opinions are also important, and they will think about them in collaboration with others. So they consider other people, but they also consider themselves too. They know how to share personal information in an appropriate way, so they won't over or undershare, which is something you would see in like porous boundaries or rigid boundaries. They know personal wants and needs. They know their own personal wants and needs, and they can communicate them effectively, which I think sometimes we might know what we want, we just don't really have the tools to say or communicate that to other people. So learning how to do that is really important. And then they also, not only are they comfortable with telling people no, when they don't want to do something or they just don't have the time. They also accept no from other people as well. They don't take it as like a personal offense. They're like, I understand that other people have boundaries too, and that's okay. And it's okay for other people to tell me no. Okay, so someone who has porous boundaries, they tend to overshare personal information, and they'll have a difficult time saying no to other people. They tend to be over-involved in others' problems, and they can be relatively dependent on the opinions of others. So something that you'll more commonly hear is like codependent relationships, where people have a really difficult time making decisions without referencing somebody else. And you can have a codependent relationship with anybody, a parent, a friend, a romantic partner. So people who would be considered codependent would probably have more porous boundaries. Also, if we have porous boundaries, we have an easier time, or we are more likely to accept things like disrespect or abuse, because we're not confident in our own opinions or our own boundaries enough to enforce those with other people. So we might find ourselves in more abusive relationships. And they also fear rejection if they don't comply with other people. So if they tell people no, or if they don't do what other people want them to do, they tend to do it out of fear and not necessarily their own personal choice and desire to want to do those things. And the last one is rigid boundaries. So people who have rigid boundaries, they tend to avoid intimacy and close relationships, usually out of fear of being hurt. They're unlikely to ask for help out of fear of being let down. So because of this, they have very few close relationships. And we are social people, and relationships are really important to us in our mental health and our well-being. So you don't have to have a lot of friends or anything like that, but having people who you feel like you can trust and be vulnerable with is important. So people whose boundaries are a bit too rigid can have a hard time opening up and maintaining healthy relationships with people. They tend to be very, probably overprotective, I would say, more so than just very protective, maybe overprotective of personal information. They can come off a bit cold or detached, even with their romantic partners. And they keep others at a distance to avoid possibilities of rejection. So this is really coming from a place of fear and concern of just being hurt or let down. And so we kind of build up a wall, and then it's really hard for us to connect with people and have people connect with us if we have rigid boundaries. Okay, so the ideal, of course, is to have healthy boundaries. So here are some tips on how you can create healthy boundaries with the people in your life. So this isn't on here, but first of all, being self-reflective on like what you feel like your boundary type is. And it can vary depending on the person that you are enforcing the boundaries with, but just being a bit self-reflective and understanding yourself a little bit more and understanding what type of boundary you tend to lean towards, and just acknowledging that. And then when you're trying to implement a boundary with somebody, what's going to be important is focusing on expressing your need and the importance of the boundary when you're trying to establish it. So if you need space from somebody, trying to, instead of just being like, leave me alone, which would be creating a boundary, but that's not really talking about why it's important for me to have like personal space and personal time. Maybe you're an introvert and having that alone time is really important to you. So expressing that, and like what you need from that person, and then why the boundary is important for you is helpful when you're trying to establish boundaries with people. Also, it's okay to say no. Remember that no is not a bad word. If you don't want to do something, you absolutely do not have to do it, no matter if the other person is being pushy or is trying to guilt you. If you feel like it's not right for you, it is definitely okay to say no. And then trying not to over explain your no. You don't have to give a lot of explanation in detail unless you want to. But a lot of times we will over explain the no to kind of try to justify our no to other people, but your no doesn't have to be justified. You can just say no, and other people need to respect that, essentially. And then the last one is to set consistent consequences for people violating our boundaries. Something that we can see is when we establish boundaries with people, especially when it's relatively new, it can be difficult for us to maintain the boundaries because we're not used to holding the boundaries either. And we don't maybe want to hurt people's feelings. And we can get a lot of pushback from the people in our life when we start doing things differently, or start implementing boundaries that weren't there before. And so we kind of feel back into a corner and pressured, and so we'll let up on the boundary. But all that's going to do is let that person know that maybe sometimes they'll say yes and maybe sometimes they'll say no. So I'll take my chances and I'll just keep crossing the boundary because they might say yes. So it's really hard, but being consistent and having consequences for people crossing the line with you so that people will learn over the course of time. So that one is really important to consider when trying to implement healthy boundaries with people. Okay, so that's my little spiel on boundaries. There are slides on the TR Conversation Instagram where I give more detail on these topics since I don't have a ton of time today. So if anybody wanted more resources on that, you can go there. I'm pretty sure all of these are posted by now, I think. And there's also one on love languages too that will also fall into the same category, but they're there, and I can share these slides too if anybody wants them. Okay, so now relationship expectations and norms. Okay, so what are expectations and what are social norms? So when we start relationships, we often have a set of expectations for ourselves and the people we are going to be in relationships with before we even enter the relationship. And these expectations are often based on socially constructed norms. And norms are basically what is considered normal within society. What society has deemed to be normal, those are what norms are, and norms a lot of times will shape our expectations of other people. So how does this play into gender role expectations? So gender role expectations are expectations that we have about others based on their gender. And we're talking about this in like a binary sense. But these expectations stem from gender norms that have been socially constructed. And these societal norms on gender can shape our expectations of our partners or our friendships or parents. But they can also perpetuate harmful stereotypes about people. And I'm keeping it relatively binary for this particular topic because there are a lot of like sexist stereotypes and like ideology that will perpetuate gender role expectations that we have for people. And they're very centered around like what a man is supposed to do and what a woman is supposed to do. And that gets us into trouble. And those two are centered around like heteronormativity and things too. So just keeping that in mind. But because of that, there can be a lot of damage that can be done by perpetuating gender role expectations and stereotypes as if they are a fact. Okay, so examples of gender role expectations. So here's just a few that you may have seen or that may have been given to you either directly or indirectly in your family or within society. So like men are supposed to be the primary financial breadwinners for a household. Women are supposed to be the primary caretaker of the household, but especially for like child rearing. And then men being just completely unemotional, not having as wide of an array of emotions as women, and then women being more emotionally attuned and generally just more emotional. And as a society, we have completely devalued emotion. So if a specific person is deemed as being more emotional, it's usually not seen as positive. It's usually seen as in a negative light. And so negative stereotypes will be attributed to that person, and in this case, it's usually women, get categorized as being more emotional, and so they'll be seen as weaker, more fragile, not being able to take care of themselves, or like not being intelligent. A lot of negative stereotypes will come with that. And so when we're thinking about how gender role expectations are shaping what we might see in a situation where gender-based violence is going on, these negative stereotypes are what is perpetuating some of the ideology and like power and control that you would see in gender-based violence that's happening in relationships. Okay, so why should you care about gender role expectations? Role expectations are important to consider in a lot of situations, but especially for couples. If you are going to partner up with somebody, it's really important to understand one another and what you think about gender roles and the expectation that you might have for your partner just in general. It's not the only thing you should consider, but it's definitely a high priority conversation that as a therapist, I see not had at all, but it almost always is playing some sort of role. And when my couples are coming in, it's playing a role in the problem. So I definitely feel like it should be a top priority conversation. Like, what are your expectations for your partner? And that goes for everybody. It doesn't just have to be like a cis hetero couple, like all couples should be considering, what am I looking for my partner, and have I communicated that need to them? And then part of the reason why relationship expectations cause issues is that they are not discussed, kind of like we say, they really don't get talked about at all. And they're often enforced as fact. We do this thing where we assume that everybody thinks the exact same way that we do. And so if we have an expectation for a partner, we just assume that our partner is on the same page and that they agree. And then they were like, when they don't, or when it's not playing out that way, we tend to get frustrated or upset with our partner because we're not on the same page. But you were never on the same page, but you just didn't know. So it's really important to, and when you're developing a healthy relationship, to consider role expectations, gender role expectations, and what do I think about them, and how am I looking for them to be perpetuated in my relationship? And is it even like healthy for me to want to perpetuate some of this ideology in my relationship? If you have a present notion about what it means to be in a relationship, definitely talk to your partner about that. Even if you think you're on the same page or not, communication is key in a healthy relationship. So making sure that the first step is understanding what you think. So being self-reflective. Do I have unrealistic or unhealthy expectations of a partner, man or woman? Do I have unhealthy expectations for them? And if I do, those are things that I personally have to work on. It's not my partner's job to work on those things. It's my job to like deconstruct that and replace them with something a bit more healthy and reasonable. So here's some example questions you can ask yourself. So a lot of times gender role expectations will play out in like households. So it'll come down to like emotional labor and like household labor and things like that. So how are household chores getting done? If you're going to be living together, who's doing that? What are the expectations around that? Is it joint? Are we splitting it? If you feel like I should do it because I'm a woman, why do you think that? We should probably talk about that. Same thing that goes with responsibility for caring for children and then financial support for the household. Are both of us financially contributing? If you feel like just a man should be contributing, why do you feel that way? Do you feel like that's a reasonable amount of pressure to put on a partner? That kind of thing. And then generally speaking, what do you think the role of a partner is? And that's kind of like a broad question, but it gets people thinking about, these are things that I expect from my partner. And if you guys are on the same page with like more traditional gender roles, if you're on the same page with your partner on that, that is fine. But you just got to make sure that you are on the same page because a lot of times people aren't, and it causes a lot of issues. So that is all I have. So I know I went over that relatively quickly. If you go to TR Conversations Instagram, there will be more stuff there. And I'm also open to answering questions or anything like that. So
perfect. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you for sharing that information with us. I do have a couple questions, a couple of things I'd kind of like to dig in a little more.
sure.
So I really liked how you kind of gave us the 3 different categories of boundaries, because I had never really heard of them categorized like that. I've always heard of, setting boundaries and never thought of it in that sense of, okay, maybe we fall into one of these different categories. So
Yeah.
What causes somebody to fall into that kind of category?
Sure, that's a good question. I think it really just depends on like our experiences with different relationships in our lives. And a lot of times it has to do with our family because there are most direct experience, like relational experiences that we have growing up. And a lot of those things get solidified very early on in our childhood and like infancy, if we're talking about like attachment theory and stuff like that. So a lot of that stuff is perpetuated and cemented very early on. So for porous boundaries, if we have a parent who is relatively overbearing, doesn't really let us have boundaries, they don't let you have your own personal space or autonomy. They're always not like regular parents tell you what to do. Like, yeah, parents tell you what to do because like they need to help you like live and exist. Like, yeah, but like they don't really hit those developmental milestones with you,
Mhm.
it can kind of like create a blurred line of what healthy boundaries are supposed to look like. Or if we have relationships with our parents where we don't have like good boundaries with one another, and like maybe my mom kind of like involves me in things that don't necessarily have to do with me as like a child, like finances or her relationship problems, that's creating like a porous boundary between us. And then I will take that and I will just assume that oversharing thing, right? So that's part of being having a porous boundary. So that's an example of what it can kind of look like. But if we have parents that are open to communicating with us and they allow us to like voice our opinions, and also are open to having like dialogue about it, let us have our own space, while also guiding us through the rest of life, that'll probably help us with developing more healthy boundaries. So it kind of just depends. Boundaries can be shaped in later relationships too, but I think a lot of times it's happening like earlier in our childhood experiences with like siblings, parents, stuff like that.
Mhm. Okay, that's really good to know. And so how would somebody, maybe, let's say they say, oh man, I'm watching this webinar, I see that maybe I have rigid boundaries. It's really hard for me to open up. I can't talk to people. What would be a step for them to kind of begin to develop that healthier boundary mindset?
Yeah, good question. I'm gonna go to therapy, but I know that's not always like an option. Not everybody has like access, so I get that. I think the self-reflection is really important, and when we are being self-reflective, then we have to take the next step of being mindful in our relationships going forward. And so at the core of being mindful is just like I'm present in the way that I'm interacting in my relationships, or like I'm interacting with life around me. I'm present and I know what I'm doing when I'm doing it. And it's hard to kind of like develop that skill, but it just takes practice. And so if you are able to identify, okay, I probably have rigid boundaries, understanding why that is, because a lot of times people who have rigid boundaries, it's there for a method of protection. And it's not just like for fun, like, oh, I guess I have rigid boundaries now, but there maybe have been things that happened in their childhood or in their earlier relationships that have kind of like shifted their boundaries or their ideology of like other people. And there might need to be some like healing around some of that stuff. Or it might need to be, once we have that self-reflection, we can go, it's not actually that person perhaps that's doing these things, but maybe certain actions are triggering something deeper in me. So I think trying to be as present as possible in your interaction so you can know when you have to like correct something or practice being vulnerable with people, which can be really, really challenging because we don't want to get hurt. But I think trying to be mindful and practicing vulnerability will help loosen up some of those boundaries, and then understanding what boundaries you even want to set with people. So part of that self-reflection is like, what do I even want from people? And then you can figure out how to healthily implement them later on when you're practicing.
So kind of what I'm hearing you say is boundaries has a lot more to do with like what we want in us as opposed to the other person on the other side. It's first being self-reflective, identifying this is what's important to me. Maybe these are things that I'm doing that I can work on, and then kind of going from there.
Yes. What do you want from other people? What's valuable to you? What are your core values? Our core values are part of like who we are, and you shouldn't have to change those. There might be stuff that you have to work on, but at the core, like if this is something that like it's integral to my personhood, you don't have to change that for somebody. There will be somebody else who will be totally okay with that, whether it's like your friend or like a partner. That will have similar values that will align with you. But if it's like a super core value, you don't have to change that. But being reflective on like everybody is going to be different, and that is okay. And they're not always going to think like me, and that's totally fine because we're autonomous people. But what do I want to see from other people? What am I willing to tolerate and what am I not? That is part of boundaries. And then how can I protect myself in the process?
That's a good point. I kind of want to move on real quick. You also mentioned a lot about gender norms and how gender norms are oftentimes a social construct. It's not like a solid fact. And I think that's really interesting because we even see in different cultures how those expectations will shift. Like in one country, it may be that perhaps the woman is more of like the breadwinner in a relationship, and the man is expected to, sit home with the children. But in another place, it's like this. How important is it to have those conversations? I know you said a lot of times people don't have them. They go in expecting, oh, we're from the same place. We have the same expectations. How would you, encourage them to start that conversation within their relationships?
Yeah, for sure. So we have like bigger picture cultural norms. We also have like just like family culture norms where it's like, even though we grew up in the same place and maybe we have the same cultural background and we grew up in the same area, our family cultures are going to be different. And so that's a lot of times where people will end up butting heads, especially with like communication. Families will communicate with each other differently, and we'll pick those up and then we'll start communicating with each other, and it's like not working. So I feel like having just like an open conversation with your partner, like, hey, I know we grew up in the same area, we're from the same like cultural background or whatever, but I feel like it would just be really important for us to talk about certain things in our relationship to make sure that things kind of run smoothly. So this is how I think about things. This is how I feel like, this is how I feel like we should communicate. Emphasis on I. This is what I think. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? And then kind of just like furthering the conversation from there. It can be just, I feel like it's better to just be open about it. And I know sometimes it can be weird, but I think we just make too many assumptions that people are on the same page with us when they're not. So it never hurts to ask. So just so what do you think about this? This is what I think.
It's good. Yeah, it's good. Just an open line of communication, because like you said, it's probably going to come up at one point in time. It's better to get it over with.
Right, exactly. It's going to come up. So it's like, we can either have a conversation about it now or never talk about it, and it'll be an argument later, but it'll come up.
That's true. That's true. All right. Thank you so much for that presentation. Wes, I know that you have presented some slides for us as well. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Sure. Sounds good. All right. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, some of the things around gender roles are going to be things that I cover in more detail. So that was actually really great that Brianna just talked about some of those points. So let's dive in. I think the way this is going to look is I'll give kind of an overview of some different points around gender-based violence and abuse. I think I'll use those terms interchangeably just so everybody knows. And then go into something that I've dove into a little bit more throughout this Orange Couch kind of series, which is the role of men in ending gender-based violence and what we can take on as men personally. And then I have a few slides just about kind of how you can support people who are in these kinds of situations. That being said, let's dive in. So what does gender-based violence look like? This was something that was new to me, and I think that it's really important for people to understand because I think in media and in general, when we hear about gender-based violence or abuse, we often think domestic violence, partner-on-partner violence, or physical violence, something where somebody comes out with bruises or worse. And often there's so much more to it that it can be. It can also look like emotional abuse. This is, abuse is a form of control where one person is trying to control and dominate another. And that can look like emotional abuse where you are putting somebody down all the time, demeaning them, making them smaller, making them feel like they are not able to live their life in the way that they want to be. A little bit of, a grayer area and harder to determine than physical abuse, but just as dangerous. Financial abuse, where an abuser actually controls the finances of the other person. I don't know if anybody's seen the show Made, on Netflix, but I think there was a really good example in that show of this happening, where the partner actually took her credit card and her other forms of paying, and so she was unable to go do anything that she would like to do. And so again, it's another form of control. And then of course, sexual abuse, which I'm sure people are aware of, but this is, again, one of the things that is, we have a lot of facts and statistics about. It's a lot more evident because it's a really serious crime, but it is not something that I think is maybe talked about as much as domestic abuse or just other general physical abuse. So I think this is really interesting, and it's good to keep in mind that all of these can occur, and it's good to kind of keep an eye out for them. Okay, so who's impacted by gender-based violence? And I put this slide here because, it's more than just the person being hurt, the person being controlled. Gender-based violence or abuse kind of ripples out into the rest of society through all of the people that that victim touches, and potentially the other victims that are hurt by the person who's abusing. So, here's some quick statistics for you. Experts estimate that 5 million children per year witness an assault on their mothers. And that kind of experience can leave you traumatized as a child for obvious reasons. Outside of that, children who are exposed to violence at home, there's downstream effects. They show higher rates of behavior problems, attention problems, aggression, substance abuse, depression, all kinds of different things, right? And of course, if anybody has ever known someone in their family or a friend who has ever had any of these problems, they know that it doesn't just impact the kid. It impacts other people in that person's life, friends, family, etc. And there's studies that show that trauma in general can be passed down through the generations. So your kids, your grandkids can actually be affected by trauma as well. And that happens through something called epigenetics, which is where your genes actually turn on or turn off because of environmental things that happen in your life, which is pretty cool and crazy in this case that it can actually change your DNA and impact you way down the line. Emotions and stress. So when a child is, really young, they can actually absorb the stress around them, the stress of their parents, the stress of other people in their life, and they take that on themselves, and it starts to affect them personally as well. It affects how they interact with other people. Attachment wounds. So this is something that the last presentation just brought up a little bit, but attachment wounds are related to how you attach to other people in your life, how you interact in the future with romantic partners as well. And so if you're if you're the child of somebody who's being abused, then it's much more likely that you're not going to get attention from your mother or from your father. And when that happens, that lack of attention can lead to you having an insecure attachment style. It can lead to you kind of turning inward. It can lead to you developing maladaptive behaviors, and that carries on throughout the rest of your life. You can change things, that's the good news, but the hard thing is that they are hard to change. It's something that you may pass on to other people just through your interactions. Okay, so that being said, we've reviewed all the ripples outward of abuse, but something that is especially poignant for me, I think, as a man, is like making this really something that matters to men, because I think that oftentimes we hear about abuse and we think of it as like, oh, that's their issue, that's somebody else's issue, because I'm not doing it myself. However, 2 to 4 million women are assaulted by their partners every year. The US Surgeon General said that attacks by male partners are the #1 cause of injury to women between the ages of 15 and 44, which is pretty mind-blowing if you think about it. The American Medical Association says that 1 in 3 women will be a victim of violence by husband or boyfriend at some point in her life. And for any men who are watching this right now, we all know at least 3 women in our lives, and I think that just really drives home the point that everyone we know in some way, shape, or form is connected to this. 43% of male students admitted to using coercive means to get sex. This is in college. This is college students. So just to drive it home, that's it's almost half almost 1 out of every 2 men. And Center for Disease Control says that violence against women, epidemic proportions. It's huge. Obviously, this is happening all the time, and it affects millions of people every year. Okay, so getting into that gender role conversation that we were just discussing before, let's talk about toxic masculinity. What can we do as men to change this, and what is it really? So activist Tony Porter, he has a great TED Talk, which I recommend everybody to check out. I can send it an email after this, but he has a speech about being in the man box. Being in the man box simply means that you are adhering to these cultural ideas of what it means to be a man. And really what that does is it limits us. It limits us as men. It, by association, limits everyone, because it's not just an issue for men, it's an issue for everyone that they interact with later on. So this idea of what masculinity is, and I'm sure everybody has heard of these things, can relate to them maybe in some way, but a man is supposed to be strong, which means that they're not weak, right? They are supposed to show no emotion, which means inherently that emotions are seen as bad. They're seen as womanly. They're seen as opposite. They're supposed to be, anger is okay, because oftentimes anger is physical, and physicality is the realm of men, which means it's not allowed for other people. Men are in charge, which means that women are not. Men are strong, women are weak. Men are owners of women and should be in control. In this, all of these ideas, they're outdated, they're not true, and they are harmful, not just to men, but to everyone in society. And not only that, but they keep men in this box of telling them what they should be and what they can be. And that keeps them from being what they really could be, which is full, liberated people who are able to express themselves in more ways than just this. So as we're getting into now, so what is real masculinity, right? Real masculinity means that it's okay to not be dominating. It's okay to not be strong or have a different definition of what strong is. It's okay to have emotions. It's very okay to have emotions. Just gonna really drive that home. You should have lots of emotions. It's okay to have women who are just seen as friends and are not as objects. And it is important to support others in their fight for justice. And it's not, stepping out of your lane. It's not being too emotional. It's important. And that is because my liberation as a man is tied to the liberation of others, which means that the more full you are as a man, the more able to experience all of these different ranges of being a man, and the more you can support others in their journey to be free in the world too, the more free you become. Okay, so now that we know that this is an issue that's important to everyone, especially men, how do we end it? How do we fix this issue? Well, it's going to be a really difficult and long journey, I'm sure, but here are a few things that we can start doing. The first is to take ownership of the issue. And this is, just going in line with what I was just talking about, understanding that this issue is an issue that affects men, it affects everyone, and therefore we have a responsibility to take action to solve it. It's not pushing it off onto someone else. Step 2 is to actually educate yourself. Watch this webinar. Do other, go watch the Orange Couch series. Go, look at shows and other media that portray this, and understand that, and also talk to victims, survivors, other people who have experienced this themselves. Number 3 is, once you get to that point, start changing the way that you consume media. So there are lots of things that are in the media that are misogynistic. Lots of books I've read have talked about rap lyrics, but there's a lot more. I think those are obvious things to listen to, but there are also other things like TV shows, ways that people are portrayed in commercials, even all of these things. If you start having the mindset of, I, by participating in this media, am a participant in abuse myself, and am supporting this type of belief that abuse is okay in all of those different forms, you start to understand, okay, the more that we support this, the more that we create a society that supports it, and even does that implicitly. They do it without really understanding what they're doing. And I'm a victim of this too. I think all of us are in some way, shape, or form, but we can all take steps to act differently. Number 4 is to challenge others. So this is probably the hardest of all of these steps, but it's really important, especially for men. I think when it's very easy for men when you're in a group of friends to have somebody say something that's a joke, against a woman, or say something that kind of fits into that domineering, men are better, you have to be strong, can't be emotional, all this kind of, the man box. And when that happens, it's important to speak up. It's important to not participate, but not just walk away, to say something. And that's really hard to do, but it's really important. So a lot of these things take bravery. And I think that you don't have to be perfect, but you have to try. And that's the first step. And it gets easier each time. And not just that. So that's the first step, is like doing that just individually, but you can also do that through joining groups. Looking at nonprofits that work on these types of issues, talking to your friends about the issues, talking to your friends about your own values, which were brought up in the last conversation, and about kind of, what's important to you, why this issue matters, why they should understand that it matters to them too. Number 5 is related to that. It's spread the word. So, talk to people, start a discussion group, get onto social media and post something. I know at the very beginning of this journey, working with the Truth and Reconciliation organization, we did a social media campaign around gender-based violence, and a lot of people participated, which is super cool to see. But it doesn't have to just be during the campaign. You can talk about this kind of stuff outside of that too. Okay, so I wanted to dive into just a few extra points here because I think that they are relevant and helpful. So, one thing, there's a lot of text on this page, forgive me for this, but one thing that I really wanted to drive home, because I think this is a really common misconception, is abuse just an anger problem? People who are abusive are just really angry, and they can't control themselves. I think that is, one, it's not true. 2, it does a good job of excusing the behavior of people who are abusive by giving them an out. If we are taking ownership of this issue, then we're taking ownership of our own behavior in either allowing people to say that it's just an anger problem, or witnessing people doing that and not telling them how it really is. So, domestic violence, or any kind of gender-based violence, is the result of the need to gain control and power in a relationship. So a person with anger management problems, this is different. They have a problem with distorted thinking, which is really the inability to manage their feelings. They feel angry and they don't know how to stop it. But that's different than wanting to control someone else. So an anger management problem is really just a skill deficit. You don't have the skills required to really understand what you're feeling. And so you express it through anger instead of saying, I feel sad, I feel guilty, I feel whatever it is. And that brings me to the next point, which is that usually when people are feeling angry, anger is not the core. People feel other things. They feel vulnerable feelings. They don't know how to handle them. And I've seen this with a lot of men when they are pushed on something, when they are asked about something that they feel vulnerable about, they get angry, they get aggressive. And that's because they don't know how to say, oh my God, I feel so much shame right now that you brought that up. I don't know how to process it, so they lash out. However, this idea of thinking that men are not emotional, so if they get angry, that's okay, because we don't have the ability to process emotions. So obviously, anger is allowed because it's this way of kind of sidestepping the processing of emotion. Well, that's a conditioned response. That's society telling us that that's okay for men to do that, because we accept that men are, again, in this man box of no emotion, that's not manly, etc. So not understanding how to deal with the emotions underlying the anger. Okay, last thing that I want to talk about is if any of you know someone who has experienced violence gender-based violence, abuse, here are some things that you can do if they come to you and talk about that happening in their life. First things first, something that people often fall into when somebody comes to them is they victim blame. They say, oh, well, you were inviting that, you shouldn't have worn that outfit, or you shouldn't have been out late at night, you shouldn't have done XYZ. People should never be abused, and it's not their fault if they do. So let's just start there. The first thing you should do is to affirm them, which means saying, hey, I hear you, I understand you, thank you so much for coming to me. Your feelings are valid, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Start there. Listen to them. Center and validate their feelings, whatever they're feeling, whether they're feeling guilty, whether they feel shame at what happened to them, they feel like they can't talk to people, you validate them, say that's okay to feel that. I'm with you. Listen to them. Don't ask too many questions, which would be a hard one for me, I think. But try to keep yourself from doing that and focus instead on making them feel safe and heard and understood and like you're there for them. Keep in mind that some survivors may have really complicated relationships with the people who have abused them. So this could be a parent, this could be a family member, this could be a partner. And they may not want to go report that person. They may not want to confront them. They may be afraid of them. They may want to continue the relationship because they're not sure that it really is abuse. So just be aware that they have complicated relationships, and that's totally valid. If you express anger, you're saying, oh, I can't believe that happened to you, like we have to go to the police immediately, they might pull away. They may not be ready for that. So just hold back and don't try to force them to do anything or impose your ideas onto them. Finally, try to anticipate what they need and just take care of them as best you can. You don't have to do everything right, but try to be there for them as best as possible. And be aware that this can be a really dangerous situation, so you don't want to push them too hard. And that's it for my slides.
Thank you so much, Wes. That was really good. And it's really refreshing to kind of hear, a man's perspective on it as well, because a lot of times it's kind of portrayed to be a women's issue, but it's not one-sided, and obviously we know that a lot of times we see the man perpetrating against the women, but we know that sometimes the reverse also occurs. And like Brianna mentioned, not every relationship is heteronormative too. So abuse can happen across the board, but it is really refreshing to hear you bring up those points. One of the things that you mentioned in the beginning was how gender-based violence can be normalized in someone's home really, really early on. And that's kind of reminding me a bit about what Brianna was talking about as well, as, a lot of times what we deem to be normal is what we grow up with, right? So we start to reflect that and mirror that in our relationships moving forward. So that's really interesting. In what ways do you think people can try to move past that? If, like, let's say perhaps in their home, that's something that they witnessed a lot, in what ways would you encourage people to help kind of process through that and move forward so that they don't continue that cycle?
I think that, that's a good question. And Brianna, please feel free to jump in here if you want to. But I think the things that come to mind for me immediately are to, one, get support as much as you can. Not everyone reacts to these things in the same way. Some people may come out of this situation and be okay and see it as a growth opportunity. Some people may be really traumatized and need a lot of help, and that's okay. So I think normalizing those feelings in whatever situation you're in and being able to seek support if you need it, I think that's step one. Outside of that, I think, really trying to, in the future, if this is an issue for you, I would say, be aware of, one, your boundaries, which Brianna talked about, which I think can be really helpful in future relationships, but also trying to be as open as you can about, what you went through and how that might affect future relationships. I think that's a conversation that you would be able to have with hopefully your friend or a close family member or your future partner. But I think being honest about where you are in that journey can be really important to healing eventually.
It's so well said. I also really liked that you brought up the Man Box TED Talk. That is such a good one. And there's something that stuck with me ever since I first watched it. And I may not get the anecdote completely correct, but the gist of it was that he was talking to a young man who was on, I believe it was like a football or a baseball team. And he asked him a question along the lines of, what would be the worst thing that your teammates could say to you or call you? And the boy responded that the worst thing that they could call him would be a girl. And he said that it would absolutely crush him if his teammates called him that. And so then, the speaker, Mr. Porter, I believe, said, what then are we teaching our young men about girls? And that to me just absolutely rocked my world, because that's so true. Out of all the things that you could be called, a girl is the worst thing. So I was just wondering if you kind of speak to that a little bit more too, of like, being a young man and growing up, was that kind of like your experience too? Is that something normalized? And how can we kind of re-script that narrative so that girls can be strong too?
I think first, to speak to that, I think, yeah, it's a crazy story to hear, but it's totally normal and is unfortunate. I think it's getting better, but it's hard to tell. And I think a lot of people grow up with that mentality, and that and that's been ingrained in them from their fathers and their grandfathers and their male authority figures in their life, who all decide to have this, feel like they need to have this macho persona in order to not feel small themselves. And so I think it's, as far as an issue, I know that it's out there, and it's something that I've definitely experienced myself. As far as how to change it, I think there are things that you can do as an individual, and there's things you can do kind of more as a unit. So as an individual, all the things that I just said, like get educated, understand the issue, try to speak up as much as you can. And when you can't speak up, don't engage, and show that you disapprove of those things, because speaking up, it's hard. It requires a lot of bravery, and it takes practice. I think, don't act in that way yourself. And when you do, catch yourself and admit that you were in the wrong. I think that that's something that people don't do enough, is they don't admit when they were wrong. And that takes a lot of, again, courage, but it helps build character. As far as what you can do as a community, as a person in the world, is when you eventually have your own family, if you're a father, for example, as a man, or a mother, then and you have children, then teach them about these things. Watch them, and if they act that way, teach them the difference. If you are just if you don't have children and you're just in society, then I would say try to join groups, try to be active, try to talk about these issues, and whenever you can, support people and people out in the world in media who are talking about these things, because obviously it's important, and we're not going to change the cultural idea unless it becomes broader than just one person.
So well said. And I know that that's something that we've all had the pleasure of being involved in, is working with TRC on this Orange Couch course and the Orange Couch movement, Educate to End GBV. How much did participating in this initiative kind of help change your mindset surrounding these issues? I'll ask you first, Brianna.
Couldn't find my unmute button. Okay, sorry. So I feel like the course was really helpful. I feel like the videos from the TV show are really impactful, because it just allows the survivor to just speak about what their experience was, and give a lot of like detailed background about like not only what their experience was in the situation, but kind of like the lead up to it, which I think a lot of times we overlook the like early stages. And a lot of times with things like abuse, we miss the fine details of things that happen very early on, and how they kind of like lead into like these bigger, grander, if you think about like the power and control wheel that Wes brought up, like the outside is the stuff that you can like clearly see, like physical, sexual, emotional abuse. And those are like really glaring things that most people in some way would be able to identify. But there's like all this little stuff that kind of like will pop up and lead up to those things kind of happening. So I like that the show highlighted the little things that lead up to, I didn't just randomly just didn't hit me one day out of nowhere. It was like there was a process that kind of like led up and it happened. And the end result was like physical or like sexual harm in the context of like my relationship. So I feel like that was really helpful for me to see that and to have that displayed for people. And then, of course, just generally speaking, working on this project with TRC and being able to look into content more deeply just for my own stuff. So like, yeah, I'm creating content for the program, but I'm also internalizing this information too and sharing it in my sphere of influence as well. So I feel like that was probably the most impactful thing for me working on this particular project.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for creating a lot of that stuff. So any of you who are watching this recording and who've been able to enter into the course, you'll see a lot of contributions from both Brianna and Wes in there. So we're very lucky to have you all working on this with us. So Wes, I'll kind of pose the same question to you and pick your brain a bit.
Sure. I mean, honestly, I think my points are going to be the same as Brianna's. The biggest thing for me watching the videos was both what Brianna said around the lead up to the abuse, but then also I think it was really interesting for me to see the different types of abuse that could happen. Like I said in the presentation, a lot of what I at least came in thinking about was the physical abuse and sexual abuse maybe, but not the other things, the other kinds of like psychological control that could happen. So that was really impactful for me. And then, as far as the other stuff, this encouraged me to like dive a lot deeper into the subject and also, think a lot about, how can I explain this to other people? And I think that, to Brianna's point, when you're sharing it out to the world, you're having to teach and you always remember more of what you teach than what you learn. So I think that helps a lot.
It's great to know. And so before we depart, I was wondering if you guys could kind of both give maybe a piece of advice or some words of wisdom for any young people who may be watching this, who are maybe just starting to enter, this kind of relationships. Maybe they're in a friendship that's a little difficult. Maybe they're struggling from some family issues. What would be a piece of advice that you would give them?
I think for me, my biggest piece of advice would be to really understand your like needs within like a relationship, whether it's like a friendship or like a romantic relationship or with family members, and to know that it's okay to separate yourself from relationships if you have the opportunity to do so. I know sometimes we don't have the option is like, I can't like separate from my family, like because maybe I'm a minor and I just can't do that. So I think figuring out how to protect yourself through understanding what your boundaries are and understanding safe ways to like implement them. So part of that is really understanding yourself, which can be challenging, just like sitting with yourself and just asking yourself, like, what do I like and what do I not like? What hurts my feelings? What doesn't hurt my feelings? Are there people around me who do that? Okay, if they do, is my environment safe enough for me to implement a boundary in a certain kind of way? Because sometimes we'll have to flex them depending on our environment. Like if we're growing up in an abusive family situation, telling somebody like no might have like more harm than good type of repercussions. So really trying to understand your environment and the relationships that you're dealing with and figuring out the best way to kind of like protect yourself. And of course, I'll always give like a therapy spiel if you have like options and resources, because your therapist can really help you deconstruct some of the harmful ideology that you might be internalizing, whether it's like the stuff that Wes was talking about in terms of the man box and how it's only okay to, if you're a man, you can be angry and that's literally about it. Can't be sad, kind of can't be happy either. That might be doing too much. So there's like a whole host of things that you can express. And I think a lot of times the anger is like frustration of like, I have these feelings and I have no idea how to do, what do I do with them? So now I'm just going to be angry and now I'm taking it out on everyone around me. So just like knowing that it's okay to express emotion and it's okay to implement boundaries with people and tell them no, that is okay. As long as your environment is safe enough for you to do that.
Mhm.
I think on my end, I would say, I guess two things. One would be, look for really try to build up your support network, your friends, family members you trust, whoever it is, teachers, whoever it could possibly be. Try to build those up, invest in those relationships, and don't be afraid to come to people if you are feeling scared or threatened in a relationship or in any kind of abusive situation. And the second thing is just if you have been in an abusive situation, it doesn't mean that you are broken or not okay, or have anything to worry about from yourself. People are very resilient and come back from a lot. And if there's anything that I've learned from psychology, it's that like we have so much potential to grow and learn from experiences that are hard. So
it's really well said. And I just wanted to say thank you to you both for not only your time to be on this webinar, but also all of the effort and time and resources that you've put into making this course and this initiative what it is. So truly thank you both so much. And for all of you who are watching, please know that this is a free resource available to you. There's tons of good information included, just like the PowerPoints that you've seen here. There are also some really great vlogs that you can watch, as well as the Orange Couch episodes. So I would highly, highly encourage you all to check out that resource. You could do so by visiting the TRC website or by Citizens High School's website. So with that, I will let you all go and say thank you very much.